The heavy oak doors of the penthouse office snapped shut, severing the low hum of the Chicago traffic below. Stetson stood blocking the exit, the custom tailoring of his Italian suit doing nothing to hide the lethal tension coiled in his broad shoulders. A single drop of crimson blood stained his crisp white collar, a stark contrast to the cold, dead calm in his grey eyes. He stepped closer, his gaze slowly trailing down the tight, unforgiving curves of the burgundy velvet dress she had dared to wear. "Who are you planning to kiss after work in that dress?" the boss whispered, the jealousy in his gravelly voice sounding more like a death sentence than a question. Penelope Gallagher was a woman who understood the art of blending into the background. At 240 pounds, she knew the world often preferred to look right through her, and in the ruthless corporate hierarchy of Mercer Logistics, invisibility was a survival tactic. For 3 years, she had been the indispensable executive assistant to Stetson Mercer, a man whose legitimate shipping empire was merely a polished steel front for the most powerful underground syndicate in the Midwest. Penny organized his calendar, managed his offshore accounts, and quietly ignored the men with broken noses and bulging jackets who visited his office after hours. She was efficient, loyal, and unapologetically fat. She had long ago traded the exhausting pursuit of thinness for the comforting armor of loose cardigans, sensible flats, and black slacks. Stetson Mercer, a man who regularly dated runway models and European heiresses, never looked twice at her, which was exactly how Penny wanted it. Or so she told herself every night when she went home to her empty apartment. But today was a Friday in late November, and the biting wind whipping off Lake Michigan had brought with it a strange, reckless sense of rebellion. Tonight, she wasn't going home to heat up leftovers. Tonight, she had a date. His name was Connor, a charming accountant she had met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park. He had looked at her with genuine interest, not the polite pity she was accustomed to, and he had asked her to dinner at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse on Rush Street. To mark the occasion, Penny had done something entirely out of character. She had marched into a boutique on the Magnificent Mile and spent an obscene amount of money on a dress. It was a deep, rich burgundy velvet wrap dress that clung to her heavy breasts, cinched at her waist, and draped over the wide flare of her hips. It didn't hide her size, it weaponized it. Paired with dark tights and a pair of thick-heeled boots, she looked like a woman who demanded to be seen. When she stepped off the private elevator onto the top floor of the Mercer Tower, the silence in the executive bullpen was deafening. Beatrice, the perpetually sour receptionist who subsisted on green juice and spite, dropped her Mont Blanc pen. Declan, Stetson's towering, scar-faced head of security, paused mid-stride, his eyes widening slightly before he gave Penny a low, appreciative whistle. "Looking sharp, Pen," Declan rumbled, adjusting his own tie. "Big plans?" "Just dinner, Declan," Penny said, trying to suppress the heat rising in her plump cheeks. She hurried to her desk, painfully aware of the heavy sway of her hips and the rustle of the velvet. She spent the morning immersed in shipping manifests and quarterly projections, trying to ignore the way the luxurious fabric felt against her skin. At 4 p.m., the intercom on her desk buzzed with a sharp, impatient tone. "Penelope, my office." Stetson's voice crackled through the speaker, low and absolute. Penny grabbed her tablet and stood, smoothing the front of the dress. She pushed open the heavy oak doors to Stetson's office. The room was massive, lined with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline. Stetson was standing by the glass, his back to her, staring out at the darkening city. He was a frighteningly handsome man, 34 years old, with sharp, aristocratic features, dark hair clipped meticulously short, and the broad, muscular build of a bare-knuckle fighter, a remnant of his violent rise to power in the city's south side. "The customs clearance for the Rotterdam shipment has been finalized, Mr. Mercer," Penny began, her voice professional and steady, and Alderman Hayes called again regarding the zoning permits for the new warehouses. Stetson didn't answer immediately. He turned around slowly, a crystal tumbler of amber liquid in his right hand. His eyes, a pale, piercing grey, locked onto her. For a long, suffocating moment, he didn't look at her face. His gaze dragged heavily over her body. He traced the deep V neckline, where the velvet strained against her cleavage, followed the cinch at her thick waist, and lingered on the curve of her heavy thighs. The air in the room seemed to evaporate. Penny shifted uncomfortably, clutching the tablet to her chest like a shield. Stetson was known for his icy detachment, but right now his eyes were burning with a dark, suffocating intensity she had never seen before. He took a step toward her, the ice in his glass clinking against the crystal. "What are you wearing?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave, slipping from smooth corporate boss into the dangerous cadence of the street boss he truly was. A dress, Mr. Mercer," Penny stammered, cursing herself for sounding so weak. "Is it inappropriate for the office? I can go home and change." "No," Stetson said sharply. He closed the distance between them, stopping mere inches away. Penny had to crane her neck to look up at him. She could smell his expensive bergamot cologne mixed with the faint, metallic scent of something darker, something she always tried to ignore. "You've worked for me for 3 years, Penelope," Stetson said, his eyes flicking to her lips. "In all that time, I have never seen you wear anything but shapeless wool and grey slacks. You dress like a widow mourning a husband who died 30 years ago. And today, you walk into my office looking like this." He reached out. Penny's breath hitched as his knuckles brushed the velvet covering her collarbone. The touch was agonizingly light, yet it sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "It's Friday," Penny whispered, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. "I have plans after work." Stetson's jaw clenched, the muscle feathered violently under his skin. The air around him suddenly felt charged with violence. "Plans?" "Yes." "Dinner." "With who?" "That is my private business, Stetson," she said, using his first name in a rare moment of defiance. His eyes darkened to the color of a stormy sea. He leaned down, his face so close to hers she could feel his breath ghosting over her cheek. "I don't like secrets in my organization, Penelope. I don't like wild cards, and I certainly do not like another man looking at what belongs in my office." Before she could process the possessive weight of his words, his hand snapped out, gripping her jaw firmly but not painfully, tilting her face up. "Who are you planning to kiss after work in that dress?" The jealous Mafia Boss asked his overweight secretary, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "Because I promise you, whoever he is, he doesn't deserve the privilege." Penny practically fled the office. She broke away from his grip, mumbled something unintelligible about filing the Hayes reports, and retreated to the safety of her desk. Her pulse was a chaotic drumbeat in her ears. Stetson Mercer had just touched her. He had looked at her heavy, soft body, not with disgust, but with a terrifying, predatory hunger. By the time 5:30 p.m. rolled around, Penny's nerves were shredded. She grabbed her wool peacoat, said a hasty goodbye to Declan, who gave her a knowing, slightly pitying look, and hurried to the elevator. Outside, the Chicago evening was freezing. The city lights blurred against the grey twilight as Penny hailed a cab to Rush Street. She tried to push Stetson out of her mind. She was overthinking it. He was a control freak, a man who viewed his employees as property. It was a power play, nothing more. He was a dangerous criminal who lived in a world of violence and deception. She was just the fat girl who managed his schedule. Gibson's was crowded, warm and smelling of rich steaks and expensive red wine. Connor was already at a corner booth. He stood up as she approached, a wide, easy smile on his face. He was handsome in an unremarkable, catalogue model sort of way. Sandy hair, blue eyes, a neatly pressed button-down shirt. "Penny," he said, taking her hand. "You look absolutely stunning. That dress is incredible on you." A genuine blush warmed her cheeks. "Thank you, Connor. It's new." They ordered drinks, and at first the date was pleasant. Connor asked about her week, they laughed over the terrible weather, and they shared an appetizer. But as the waiter cleared their plates and poured a second glass of Cabernet, the conversation took a subtle, jagged turn. "So, you work at Mercer Logistics," Connor said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the white tablecloth. "That's quite the operation. I hear Stetson Mercer is a brilliant CEO." "He's very demanding," Penny said carefully, taking a sip of wine. She was trained to be vague. "I bet. Managing all those shipping routes, from the port of Chicago down the Mississippi, it must be a logistical nightmare." Connor swirled his wine, "especially the cargo coming in from the Canadian border. Does he handle the routing for those directly, or do you manage the schedules?" Penny froze. The wine suddenly tasted like ash. Mercer Logistics did have routes from Canada, but they were strictly off the books. They were the routes Stetson used to move untraceable cash and unlicensed firearms. No ordinary accountant would know about those, let alone bring them up on a first date. She looked at Connor. The easy, charming smile was still there, but his blue eyes were sharp, calculating, and completely devoid of warmth. "I just handle his basic calendar, Connor," Penny said, her voice dropping a notch. "I wouldn't know anything about specific routes." "Come on, Penny," Connor chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "A smart girl like you? An executive assistant with top clearance? You know everything. I'm just curious. A friend of mine in the import business is trying to figure out how Mercer manages to clear customs so fast at the northern checkpoints." Penny's blood ran cold. She slowly reached for her purse under the table. "I think I should go." "Don't be like that," Connor said, his hand shooting across the table to clamp down tightly over her wrist. His grip was entirely too hard, his fingers digging into her soft flesh. "We're just making conversation. Besides, we haven't ordered dinner yet." "Let go of me," Penny hissed, trying to pull her arm back. Across the restaurant, sitting alone in a dimly lit booth near the bar, a man in a dark suit slowly lowered his newspaper. Stetson Mercer had been watching them for 30 minutes. When he saw Connor's hand wrap around Penny's wrist, Stetson didn't blink. He just reached into his breast pocket, pulled out his phone, and typed a single, encrypted message to Declan. "Allie. Now." "Look, Penelope." Connor's voice dropped, the charm completely evaporating, replaced by a cold, menacing rasp. "My bosses are very interested in the Canadian schedules. You're going to come with me to a nice, quiet place, and you're going to open your laptop and show me the logistics software. If you do, you walk away. If you don't..." Connor didn't finish the threat. He didn't have to. The reality of her situation came crashing down on her. She hadn't been asked out because she was pretty or interesting, or because the burgundy velvet dress looked good on her curves. She had been targeted. She was a vulnerable, lonely, overweight woman who had access to the secrets of the most dangerous man in Chicago. She was easy prey. Tears of humiliation and pure terror stung the corners of her eyes. She had been so stupid. "I don't have my laptop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Then you'll take me to the office," Connor said, standing up and pulling her roughly to her feet. "Keep quiet, smile, and walk to the door." Penny stumbled against the heavy wooden table, the edge digging into her hip. She allowed herself to be guided through the crowded restaurant, her heart hammering wildly. She looked around, hoping to catch a waiter's eye, but everyone was engrossed in their steaks and conversations. They stepped out the heavy glass doors into the freezing Chicago night. Instead of leading her to the street to hail a cab, Connor yanked her sharply to the right, dragging her toward the narrow, poorly lit alleyway that ran behind the restaurant's kitchen. "Where are we going?" Penny cried out, her high-heeled boots slipping on a patch of black ice. "My car is parked out back. Shut up and walk," Connor snarled, shoving her forward. The alley smelled of rotting vegetables and stale beer. The sound of the street faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of an industrial generator. Penny realized with a sickening jolt of panic that if he forced her into a car here, she was never coming back. She stopped walking, planting her heavy boots onto the pavement, dropping her weight to anchor herself. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you." Connor spun around, his face twisting with ugly rage. He reached under his jacket, the metallic gleam of a suppressed pistol catching the dim light of the alley lamp. "Listen to me, you fat bitch. You're going to get in the car, or I'm going to put a bullet in your knee right now and drag you." Penny squeezed her eyes shut, preparing for the blinding pain, a scream tearing at her throat. But the gunshot never came. Instead of a gunshot, the alley was suddenly filled with the deafening roar of a V8 engine. A massive, matte black armored SUV tore down the narrow alleyway from the opposite end, its headlights blindingly bright. The vehicle slammed on its brakes, the heavy tires skidding on the frost-slicked pavement, stopping mere inches from Connor. Connor staggered backward, raising his weapon toward the SUV, but he was too slow. The heavy passenger door kicked open with bone-shattering force, catching Connor square in the chest and sending him flying backward into a stack of empty steel kegs. Before Connor could recover, a massive figure stepped out of the vehicle. It was Declan. The scar-faced enforcer didn't say a word. He moved with terrifying speed, kicking the gun out of Connor's hand so hard the metal shattered against the brick wall. Penny stumbled back against the icy bricks, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her hands covering her mouth. "You broke my ribs," Connor screamed, clutching his chest, trying to scramble backward on the greasy pavement. The rear passenger door of the SUV opened slowly. The heavy, measured footsteps that followed echoed loudly in the confined space. Stetson Mercer stepped into the harsh glare of the headlights. He was no longer wearing his overcoat. He had stripped down to his white dress shirt, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faded ink. The cold, dead calm was back in his grey eyes, but it was accompanied by an aura of pure, unadulterated violence. He didn't look at Penny. His gaze was locked entirely on Connor. "Declan," Stetson said, his voice soft, almost conversational. "Hold him up." Declan reached down with one massive hand, grabbed Connor by the collar of his expensive coat, and hauled him to his feet, pinning him against the brick wall. Connor's face was pale, slick with sweat and terror. "Mercer!" Connor gasped out, spitting a glob of bloody saliva onto the ground. "You're making a mistake. The O'Bannon family isn't going to let this go. You touch me, and the truce is dead." "The O'Bannon family sent a rat to try and seduce my secretary to steal my shipping manifests," Stetson said, stepping closer. "The truce died the second you touched her." "She's a liability, Stetson," Connor choked out, trying to sound brave but failing miserably. "Look at her, a pathetic, lonely sow. It was too easy. You think a woman like that has the stomach to work for the Mercer Syndicate? She's weak." Penny flinched as if she had been struck physically. The words tore through her, affirming every dark, insecure thought she had ever had about herself. She shrank against the wall, wrapping her arms around her thick waist, trying to make herself as small as possible in the striking velvet dress. Stetson stopped in front of Connor. He tilted his head slightly, studying the man. "You have a very poor understanding of value, Connor, and a profound lack of respect." In a movement so fast, Penny barely registered it. Stetson's hand darted into his waistband. A flash of silver cut through the dim light. A heavy, custom-made combat knife, the blade serrated and wicked, was suddenly in his grip. Without a word, without a flicker of hesitation, Stetson drove the blade deep into Connor's thigh, right above the knee, and twisted. Connor let out a shrieking, animalistic howl of agony. His legs gave out, but Declan held him upright against the wall. Thick, hot, crimson blood erupted from the wound, splattering across the alley pavement, violently dark against the dirty white snow. Penny screamed, pressing her hands to her ears, closing her eyes against the horrific spray of violence. The metallic, coppery smell of the blood hit her nose instantly, mixing with the frigid Chicago air. She had known Stetson was a criminal. She had seen the aftermath of his business, but she had never, not once in 3 years, seen him commit the violence himself. "This is a message for the O'Bannons," Stetson whispered, leaning in close to Connor's ear over the man's pathetic sobbing. "Tell them, if they ever come within 50 miles of my business again, I will burn their houses down with them inside. And tell them," Stetson pulled the knife out with a sickening squelch, causing a fresh torrent of blood to pour down Connor's leg, "if anyone ever looks at my woman again, I will take their eyes. My woman." The words hung in the freezing air, heavy and absolute. Stetson wiped the bloody blade clean on Connor's expensive jacket, sheathed it, and nodded to Declan. Declan dropped the weeping, bleeding man into the trash and garbage of the alleyway. Stetson turned slowly. His white dress shirt was pristine, save for a single, stark drop of blood that had splashed up and stained his crisp white collar. He walked toward Penny. Penny was hyperventilating, her back pressed hard against the brick. The glamorous velvet dress felt heavy and ridiculous now. She was a civilian caught in a war zone, a fool who thought she was going on a normal date. Stetson stopped right in front of her. The terrifying monster who had just maimed a man vanished, replaced instantly by a man looking at a woman with desperate, consuming focus. He reached out, his large, warm hands gently framing her face. His thumbs brushed away the tears leaking from her eyes. "Are you hurt, Penelope?" he asked, his voice rough, shaking slightly with an emotion she couldn't name. No, she sobbed, trembling uncontrollably. He grabbed my wrist. Stetson's jaw tightened. He looked down at her wrist, already beginning to bruise a dark purple. The fury returned to his eyes, but he suppressed it, focusing back on her. "I'm sorry," Penny cried, the humiliation crashing over her. "I'm so sorry, Stetson. I was stupid. I thought he liked me. I didn't know he was O'Bannon." "Do not apologize," Stetson commanded softly. He stepped closer, stepping into her space, letting the heat of his large body warm her freezing skin. "You are not stupid. You are the smartest, most capable woman I have ever known. The only mistake made tonight was mine." Penny looked up at him, confused, terrified, and captivated. "Your mistake?" "Yes," Stetson murmured, his eyes dropping to her lips again, just as they had in the office hours ago. "My mistake was letting you believe that any other man could have you. My mistake was staying silent for 3 years, because I thought keeping you behind a desk would keep you safe from my world." He stepped even closer, his chest pressing against her heavy breasts. The velvet dress yielded to his solid muscle. "You asked me if your dress was inappropriate for the office," Stetson whispered, his face descending toward hers. "It was. Because the moment you walked in wearing it, all I could think about was tearing it off of you. You are mine, Penelope. You have always been mine." Before she could process the confession, Stetson's mouth crashed down onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was bruising, desperate, and entirely possessive. He tasted of expensive bourbon and raw adrenaline. Penny gasped against his lips, and he took advantage, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her completely. His large hands slid from her face, down to her neck, and then down her back, gripping the heavy flare of her hips, pulling her flush against him. For the first time in her life, Penny didn't feel fat, or invisible, or ugly. In the arms of the most dangerous man in Chicago, surrounded by the smell of copper blood and freezing rain, she felt like a goddess. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, kissing him back with a fierce, desperate hunger she hadn't known she possessed. When Stetson finally pulled away, they were both breathing heavily. He kept one arm firmly wrapped around her waist, anchoring her to him. He looked over his shoulder at the bleeding man groaning in the dirt. "Declan, call the cleaner. Make sure O'Bannon gets his rat back alive, but just barely," Stetson ordered, his tone back to the icy CEO. He turned back to Penny, easily sweeping her up into his arms, ignoring her weight as if she were made of air. He carried her to the waiting SUV and placed her in the back seat, climbing in right after her and pulling her onto his lap. "Where are we going?" Penny asked, her voice small but steady, burying her face into the curve of his neck, right next to the bloodstain on his collar. "Home," Stetson said, the heavy doors of the SUV closing, sealing them in the dark luxury of the vehicle as it sped away from the alley. "We are going home. And tomorrow, we are going to have a very long conversation about your new position in the Mercer family." The private elevator opened directly into Stetson's penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria, a sprawling, two-story fortress of glass, black marble, and brushed steel overlooking the glittering expanse of the Gold Coast. Stetson carried Penny inside, kicking the heavy mahogany doors shut behind them, effectively locking out the chaos of the Chicago underworld. He didn't set her down until they reached the massive master bathroom, a space larger than Penny's entire apartment. He placed her gently on the edge of a deep soaking tub. The adrenaline of the alleyway was fading, leaving Penny shivering violently, her teeth chattering despite the ambient heat of the luxurious suite. Stetson stripped off his ruined white shirt, the drop of blood on the collar glaring at her like an accusation. His torso was a map of old violence, faded knife scars across his ribs and a jagged bullet wound near his left shoulder. He tossed the shirt into a corner and turned the brass fixtures of the sink, soaking a plush white towel in warm water. "Give me your hand," Stetson instructed, his voice a low, soothing rumble that stood in stark contrast to the monster who had carved up a man 20 minutes prior. Penny offered her trembling right arm. The skin around her thick wrist was already blooming into a dark, angry ring of purple and black where Connor had gripped her. Stetson's jaw ticked as he stared at the bruise. He gently pressed the warm, damp towel against her skin. "It doesn't hurt that much," Penny lied softly, her eyes tracing the hard lines of his face. "He will never walk right again, Penelope. And if Liam O'Bannon has a shred of intelligence, he will put his nephew out of his misery before I do it myself," Stetson said quietly, carefully wiping a smudge of dirt from her forearm. He set the towel down and looked up, meeting her eyes. "You are safe here. No one gets past the lobby without Declan's authorization, and my men are already locking down the perimeter." "I can't stay here, Stetson," Penny whispered, wrapping her arms around her heavy waist, suddenly hyper-aware of her body in the blinding, pristine light of the bathroom. The burgundy velvet dress felt like a costume she had stolen. "I have a cat. I have a life. I'm just an assistant." Stetson knelt on the marble floor, completely uncaring of his expensive wool trousers. He took both of her hands in his large thumbs stroking her knuckles. "You haven't been just an assistant since the day you walked into my office 3 years ago," Stetson said, his pale grey eyes burning with a fierce, possessive heat. "I watched you, Penelope. I watched how you handled the executives who thought they could talk over you. I watched how you organized my chaos. I saw the way you tried to hide yourself in those terrible grey sweaters, and it drove me half insane, because all I wanted to do was strip them off and see the woman beneath." Penny swallowed hard, tears welling in her eyes again. "I'm fat, Stetson. I'm not the kind of woman a man like you parades around. Look at me. I'm soft. I take up too much space." "You take up exactly the space you are meant to," Stetson growled, rising slightly to frame her face with his hands. "I am surrounded by sharp, starving, artificial people all day long. You are the only real thing in my life. Every curve, every ounce of your softness, it is mine to worship. Do you understand me? I will kill any man who makes you feel otherwise. Starting with O'Bannon." He kissed her then, deeply and reverently, silencing her insecurities with the intoxicating taste of his desire. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. But things are going to change now. Connor was right about one thing. The O'Bannons are coming for the Canadian logistics routes. They know about the ghost shipments. Tomorrow, I'm transferring you to a secure location in the Hamptons. You'll be off the board until the war is over." Penny stiffened. The romantic haze evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sharp clarity. She pulled her hands away from his grasp. "No." Stetson blinked, clearly unaccustomed to the word. "Penelope, this isn't a negotiation. The O'Bannon Syndicate will use you to get to me. They want the encrypted ledgers for the northern routes." "They can't have them," Penny said, her voice dropping the tremor and adopting a steely resolve. She stood up, smoothing the velvet over her wide hips. "Because those ledgers are protected by a polymorphic encryption key that changes every 12 hours. Stetson stared at her, his brows knitting together. "How do you know that?" "Only my head of cybersecurity knows the encryption protocols." "Your head of cybersecurity, David, is an idiot who spends half his day trading cryptocurrency on company servers," Penny said flatly. She took a deep breath. It was time to pull back the curtain. "Stetson, who do you think fixes the discrepancies when the cargo manifests don't match the customs reports? Who do you think reroutes the shell company funds through the Cayman accounts before the IRS algorithms can flag them?" Stetson was utterly silent. 3 years ago, when you hired me, your digital infrastructure was a mess," Penny continued, pacing the marble floor, the heavy thud of her boots echoing in the large room. "You were bleeding money on the Toronto route because your dispatchers were using outdated radio frequencies that the feds were easily tapping. I didn't just manage your calendar. I rewrote the entire routing algorithm. I built the shadow ledger." You built the network?" Stetson breathed out, looking at her as if he were seeing her for the very first time. "I have a master's degree in applied cryptography from MIT, Stetson. I graduated top of my class under my mother's maiden name," Penny revealed, her chin held high. "I took a job as a secretary because I wanted a quiet life after a corporate espionage scandal at my last firm nearly got me indicted. I wanted to be invisible. But when I saw how exposed your syndicate was, I couldn't help myself. I fixed it. I am the architect of the Canadian routes." A slow, terrifying smile spread across Stetson Mercer's face. It wasn't the smile of a lover. It was the smile of a ruthless king who had just discovered his queen was a dragon. "You," Stetson murmured, standing up and closing the distance between them, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her lush body against his chest. "You are magnificent." "I'm not going to the Hamptons, Stetson," Penny said, looking up into his eyes, her heart pounding with a new, thrilling kind of adrenaline. "If Liam O'Bannon wants a war over my logistics network, he's going to find out exactly why you don't mess with the woman who holds the keys." By Tuesday, the city of Chicago was holding its breath. The underground truce was shattered, and the fallout was swift and brutal. Liam O'Bannon, an old-school Irish mob boss who still believed in solving problems with car bombs and baseball bats, was out for blood. The maiming of his nephew Connor was an insult he could not ignore. But O'Bannon was also cunning. He knew Stetson Mercer's private army, led by Declan, was practically impenetrable in a street war. So, Liam struck where it hurt most, the legitimate front. Penny stood in the center of Stetson's executive office, her eyes fixed on the massive multi-monitor display on the wall. She had ditched the velvet dress for her usual professional attire, a tailored black blazer that flared elegantly over her wide hips and a crisp white blouse. But her demeanor had completely transformed. She was no longer the quiet, invisible secretary. She was commanding the room. "They've put a freeze on the Mercer Logistics primary accounts at Chase Bank," Stetson said, pacing behind his heavy oak desk, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "And 2 of our cargo ships are being held at the port of Montreal. Customs officials are citing anonymous tips about contraband." "It's Alderman Hayes," Declan grunted from the corner of the room, his massive arms crossed over his chest. He was cleaning the slide of a Glock 19. "O'Bannon owns Hayes. The alderman is pulling strings with the Port Authority and the federal judges to choke our cash flow. We should pay Hayes a visit tonight. Remind him who built this city." "No," Penny said sharply, turning away from the screens. Both men looked at her. "No blood." "Not yet. If you kill an alderman, the FBI will swarm Mercer Logistics, and the O'Bannons will swoop in and take the infrastructure while you're busy fighting federal indictments. That's exactly what Liam wants." Stetson stopped pacing and leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. He looked at Penny with a mixture of raw lust and deep admiration. "What's the play, Penelope?" "O'Bannon is playing checkers with baseball bats. We are going to play chess," Penny said, walking over to her laptop, which was now permanently docked on Stetson's desk. Her thick fingers flew across the keyboard with blinding speed. "Alderman Hayes is corrupt, but he's also greedy. For the past 2 years, I've been running a background subroutine on all political figures associated with our zoning permits. Just housekeeping." Declan chuckled darkly. "Remind me never to piss you off, Pen." "Look at this," Penny said, projecting her screen onto the main wall monitor. Complex spreadsheets, offshore banking records, and heavily redacted emails flooded the screen. Hayes isn't just taking bribes from the O'Bannons. He's been embezzling union pension funds through a shell company registered in Belize. A shell company that, coincidentally, uses the prestigious law firm of Kirkland and Ellis for its stateside legal shielding. Stetson's eyes narrowed as he read the data on the screen. "This is a federal RICO case, waiting to happen. If this leaks, Hayes spends the rest of his life in ADX Florence." "Exactly," Penny said, a cold, ruthless smile touching her lips. It was a smile she had learned from watching Stetson for 3 years. "We don't need to shoot him, we just need to put the gun to his head and let him pull his own trigger." She tapped a few more keys. "I've already compiled the dossier. I'm routing it through a secure proxy server to Hayes's private email right now, with a blind copy set to drop into the inbox of the lead investigative reporter at the Chicago Tribune. The timer is set for 60 minutes. Stetson walked around the desk, stopping right behind her. He placed his large hands on her shoulders, his thumbs massaging the tension in her neck. The heat of his body radiated through her blazer. "What are your terms, architect?" Stetson asked softly, his breath stirring her hair. "I just sent Hayes a text from an untraceable burner," Penny replied, leaning back slightly into his solid chest. "He has exactly 30 minutes to make the phone calls to lift the bank freeze and clear the Montreal ships. If he does, I kill the timer on the email to the Tribune. If he doesn't, his life is over." The office descended into a tense, suffocating silence. Declan stopped cleaning his gun, watching the digital clock on the wall monitor tick down. Stetson remained stationed behind Penny, his hands a heavy, comforting weight on her shoulders, silently declaring to anyone in the room that she was under his absolute protection. At exactly 24 minutes, Stetson's encrypted cell phone rang. He picked it up, putting it on speaker and setting it on the desk. "Speak." "It's done." Alderman Hayes's voice echoed through the room, high-pitched, trembling, and entirely stripped of its usual political arrogance. "The holds are lifted. The accounts are unfrozen. Mercer, please. Whoever you have working for you, whatever hacker you hired, tell them to stop. I'm out. I resign tomorrow. Just don't send those files." Stetson looked down at Penny. She met his gaze, her dark eyes flashing with triumph. She reached out and hit the delete key on her laptop. The timer on the screen vanished. "Have a pleasant retirement, Alderman," Stetson said coldly, and ended the call. Declan let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. Not a single bullet fired." "Send a team to the Montreal ports to ensure the cargo moves immediately," Stetson ordered his enforcer. "And double the guard on Penelope's apartment. Go." "Yes, boss," Declan said, giving Penny a respectful nod before slipping out of the heavy oak doors. Once they were alone, Stetson reached down, grasped the arms of Penny's chair, and spun her around to face him. He braced his hands on the armrests, leaning in, caging her in. "You just saved my empire in less than 30 minutes from a laptop," Stetson said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "I protect what's mine, Stetson," Penny said boldly, her hands coming up to grip his lapels. She was done hiding. She was done feeling inadequate. She was exactly the woman this terrifying man needed. "Liam O'Bannon is going to realize his political shield is gone," Stetson murmured, his lips brushing hers. "He's going to be desperate. He'll come for us directly, now." "Let him come," Penny breathed against his mouth, pulling him down into a searing, victorious kiss. "We'll be ready." Heavy rain battered the reinforced glass of Mercer Tower on Thursday night, washing the neon glow of the Chicago skyline into a smeared, chaotic watercolor. Inside the subterranean server level, 3 stories beneath the bustling pavement of Lower Wacker Drive, the air conditioning hummed with a frigid, mechanical intensity. Penelope Gallagher sat in the center of the flashing server racks, a black tactical jacket zipped tightly over her thick curves. The velvet dress was a distant memory. Tonight, she was dressed for war. Her fingers danced across the illuminated keyboard of her custom rig, her eyes tracking the anomalous data spikes on the dark web monitoring software she had built from scratch. "They're moving," Penny said, her voice echoing in the cavernous room. Stetson Mercer stood behind her, loading a fresh magazine into his Sig Sauer P226. He wore black tactical gear, his broad shoulders tense, the faint metallic scent of gun oil clinging to him. Declan was positioned near the reinforced steel door, racking a heavy Mossberg shotgun. Liam O'Bannon, stripped of his political protection and hemorrhaging money after the Chase Bank freeze, had done exactly what Penny predicted. He had panicked. In the underground world, a boss who looked weak didn't survive the week. O'Bannon had mobilized his heaviest hitters, bypassing the heavily fortified street-level entrances by using the decommissioned maintenance tunnels that connected directly to the city's ancient subway grid. "How many, Penelope?" Stetson asked, stepping closer to her chair, his eyes fixed on the red dots multiplying on her monitors. 3 teams of 4, Penny replied, her heart drumming a steady, adrenaline-fueled rhythm against her ribs. She wasn't terrified like she had been in the alleyway. She was in her element. 12 men heavily armed. They just breached the sub-basement fire doors. They're bypassing the biometric scanners using military-grade decryptors. "They think they're sneaking in," Declan rumbled, a cruel, anticipation-laced grin splitting his scarred face. "Let them think it," Penny said, her fingers flying over the keys. She initiated the Castle Doctrine protocol she had coded into the building's smart infrastructure. "I'm cutting the primary power to levels B1 through B3, switching to emergency red light only. I'm also locking the elevator shafts and venting the HVAC systems in the east corridors to drop the temperature to near freezing. Let's make them miserable." The server room plunged into darkness for a fraction of a second before the backup generators kicked in, bathing them in a bloody crimson glow. On the security feeds, Penny watched as O'Bannon's heavily armed mercenaries stumbled in the sudden darkness of the sub-basement. They were professionals, equipped with night vision goggles, but they weren't prepared for the building itself to fight back. "Declan, Team Alpha is routing through the east stairwell. I've deadbolted the exits on floors 2 and 3. They are trapped in the concrete chute," Penny instructed, her voice devoid of emotion, pure calculation taking over. "My favorite kind of fish in a barrel," Declan said, chambering around. He opened the server room door and slipped out into the shadows, a massive apex predator hunting in his own territory. "Team Beta is trying to hack the service elevator," Penny continued, typing furiously to counter their digital intrusion. "They're using a brute force algorithm. It's sloppy." She hit a command, overloading the elevator's motherboard with a massive electrical surge. On the screen, a shower of sparks erupted from the elevator control panel, blowing the mercenary tech backward. "That leaves Team Charlie, and Liam O'Bannon himself," Stetson noted, pointing to the largest cluster of red dots moving purposefully through the central corridor, heading straight for the server room. O'Bannon wanted the digital ledgers, and he wanted Stetson's head. "He brought his personal guard," Penny observed, zooming in on the feed. Liam O'Bannon, a stocky, silver-haired man with a bulldog face, marched in the center of a diamond formation of heavily armed enforcers. "They're 2 minutes out. Stetson, the reinforced door will hold against small arms, but they have breaching charges." "Then we open the door for them," Stetson said, a terrifying, icy calm settling over his aristocratic features. He looked down at Penny, his grey eyes burning in the red emergency light. "Are the uploads complete?" "Almost," Penny said, an encrypted progress bar ticking across her main screen. "I need 90 seconds. "I will give you 90 seconds, Stetson promised. He kissed the top of her head, a brief, fiercely protective gesture, and walked toward the steel door, his gun raised. Gunfire suddenly echoed through the concrete walls, a deafening, rhythmic booming coming from the east stairwell. Declan had found Team Alpha. The screams that followed were short, brutal, and entirely obscured by the blast of the Mossberg. Blood was already spilling in the foundations of Mercer Tower. "They're at the corridor entrance," Penny warned, watching the camera feed outside their door. "Kill the lights in the corridor," Stetson ordered. Penny hit the switch. Outside, the hallway went pitch black. Immediately, the sound of heavy boots echoed outside the server room. Someone slapped a block of C4 against the reinforced steel. "Fire in the hole!" a muffled voice shouted. "Brace!" Stetson commanded. Penny clamped her hands over her ears and ducked under the heavy steel desk. The explosion rocked the subterranean floor, sending a shockwave that rattled her teeth. The heavy steel door was blown inward, tearing off its hinges and crashing onto the server room floor with a deafening metallic screech. Thick, acrid grey smoke billowed into the crimson-lit room. Through the smoke, 3 mercenaries stormed in, assault rifles raised, sweeping the room. But Stetson was a ghost. He had positioned himself perfectly in the blind spot created by the blown door. Stetson moved with lethal precision. He fired twice, the suppressed rounds taking down the first mercenary with a wet thud. The second guard turned, firing wildly into the server racks, shattering glass and showering the room in sparks. Stetson didn't flinch. He closed the distance, grabbed the barrel of the man's rifle, forcing it upward, and drove his combat knife deep into the man's throat. Hot, arterial blood sprayed across the black server cabinets. The third mercenary swung around, locking his sights on Penny, who was huddled beneath the desk, illuminated by the glow of her monitors. "No!" Stetson roared, throwing his knife. The heavy blade buried itself to the hilt in the mercenary's chest, dropping him instantly, his blood pooling rapidly on the polished concrete floor. The smoke began to clear, revealing Liam O'Bannon standing in the ruined doorway, an old-school .45 caliber revolver leveled directly at Stetson's chest. "It's over, Mercer," O'Bannon rasped, stepping over the bleeding bodies of his men. His eyes flicked to Penny under the desk, and his lip curled in absolute disgust. "I lost a lot of good men tonight, but taking your empire and putting a bullet in your fat pig of a secretary makes it entirely worth it." Penny didn't cower. She didn't cry. The progress bar on her screen hit 100%. A bright green "transfer complete" flashed across her monitor. She slowly slid out from under the desk, standing up to her full height, her heavy curves cutting a formidable silhouette against the red emergency lights. "You haven't won anything, Liam," Penny said, her voice dripping with lethal, aristocratic condescension that mirrored Stetson perfectly. O'Bannon barked out a harsh, ugly laugh. "Shut your mouth, sweetheart. I have the gun. I have the server room. The Canadian logistics ledgers are mine." "Are they?" Penny asked, stepping out from behind the desk, moving to stand shoulder to shoulder with Stetson. She ignored the gun pointed at them. She looked at O'Bannon not with fear, but with the cold, dissecting gaze of a scientist examining an insect. "You should check your phone, Liam. I imagine your financial manager at Cayman National Bank is desperately trying to reach you right now." O'Bannon's cruel smile faltered. His eyes darted nervously. "What are you talking about?" "While you were busy marching your men through a damp tunnel like a rat," Penny explained smoothly, crossing her arms over her chest. "I wasn't just locking doors. I was using your brute force intrusion against you. Your tech guys tried to hack my servers. They established a two-way digital bridge. It was a very stupid mistake." She tapped a single key on her remote console. The massive wall monitor switched from security feeds to a series of banking ledgers. O'Bannon's name was plastered across the top. "I backtraced their connection directly to the O'Bannon Syndicate's central mainframe in Canaryville," Penny stated, her voice echoing with the finality of a judge passing sentence. "And I took everything. The offshore accounts in Belize, drained, the Cayman National Bank safety deposits, liquidated and routed through 50 different cryptocurrency tumblers. The real estate holdings under your shell corporations? I've transferred the deeds to a domestic abuse charity under an irrevocable digital trust." Liam O'Bannon's face drained of color. His hand, holding the heavy revolver, began to shake. "You're lying. That's impossible. Our firewalls." "Your firewalls were built in 2018. They were pathetic," Penny sneered. "But I didn't just take your money, Liam. I took your freedom." She hit another key. A copy of an email appeared on the screen, addressed to the special agent in charge at the FBI Chicago field office on Roosevelt Road. Attached were thousands of files. "Every bribe you paid to Alderman Hayes, every hit you ordered over the last decade, the exact coordinates of your weapons caches in the South Side," Penny listed, driving the nails into his coffin. "I sent it to the feds 5 minutes ago. Your empire is gone. Your money is gone. You are a ghost, Liam. And the FBI SWAT teams are currently tearing your Canaryville headquarters apart." O'Bannon stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The devastating reality of his total ruin crashed over him, the hard karma of a lifetime of brutality, delivered by the very woman he had called a weak liability and a fat pig. "You!" O'Bannon choked out, raising the trembling gun, his eyes wide with desperate, unhinged madness. "I'll kill you both." Before his finger could twitch on the trigger, a thunderous boom erupted from the hallway. A slug from a Mossberg shotgun tore through O'Bannon's right shoulder, spinning him violently around. The heavy revolver clattered uselessly to the floor. O'Bannon collapsed, screaming in agony, clutching the bloody ruin of his arm. Declan stepped into the server room, his face splattered with blood, the shotgun smoking in his hands. He looked down at the weeping, ruined mob boss on the floor. "East stairwell is clear, boss," Declan grunted, entirely unbothered by the carnage. "Cops will be here soon. Feds too, if Penny's email hit their servers." "Let them come," Stetson said, kicking O'Bannon's gun out of reach. He looked down at the man who had ordered the attack on his woman. There was no rage left in Stetson's eyes, only the cold dismissal of a king discarding garbage. "The FBI will find a wanted criminal bleeding in the basement of a legitimate logistics company after a failed burglary. Our ledgers are clean. Our hands are clean." Stetson turned his back on O'Bannon, dismissing his existence entirely. He walked toward Penny, his boots leaving faint crimson footprints on the concrete. The adrenaline was finally beginning to crash, leaving Penny breathless. The reality of what she had just done, dismantling a multi-million-dollar criminal syndicate with nothing but a keyboard and her brilliant mind, was settling in. Stetson stopped in front of her. He reached out, his large, blood-stained hands gently gripping her waist, pulling her heavy, gorgeous curves flush against his hard, armored body. "A ghost," Stetson murmured, repeating her words to O'Bannon, a slow, incredibly proud smile spreading across his handsome face. "You turned the most feared man in the South Side into a beggar in under 10 minutes. "He insulted my intelligence," Penny whispered, wrapping her arms around his thick neck, the smell of gun smoke intoxicating her. "And he threatened what belongs to me." Stetson's eyes darkened with raw, possessive heat. "What belongs to you?" "You," Penny said boldly, surging upward on her toes, pressing her soft, full lips against his. "This empire, all of it. I'm not hiding in the background anymore, Stetson. I am your partner." "You are my queen," Stetson corrected fiercely, capturing her lips in a deep, bruising kiss that tasted of victory and blood. He poured every ounce of his devotion into her, worshipping the brilliant, beautiful, overweight woman who had just cemented his rule over the city. "And the underworld will bow to you." Penelope Gallagher no longer hid behind oversized cardigans or the quiet title of an executive assistant. Standing beside Stetson Mercer in the penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline, she wore her curves in tailored designer silk, a queen surveying her undisputed territory. The underground war had ended, not with a barrage of street fire, but with the quiet, lethal keystrokes of a woman the world had fatally underestimated. Liam O'Bannon's empire was reduced to ashes, his legacy erased by the very secretary he had dismissed as a weak liability. Stetson wrapped his scarred arms around her waist, pulling her heavy, warm body against his chest, completely devoted to the brilliant architect of his shadow network. They ruled the city's legitimate and illegitimate veins together, a testament to the fact that true power doesn't shout from the rooftops. It waits, watches, and strikes from the shadows.